Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight's video has been graciously sponsored by Creepy Crate. Everything you see on screen has been generously sent to me from them. It is an awesome bi-monthly service where you receive a Creepy Crate filled with all kind of horror-themed goodies, and at least one book every crate, which is a great read. If you'd like to get one of your very own, you can get $5 off your first Creepy Crate using discount code MORTIS. You'll find a link in the description if you're interested in signing up. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I grew up in Alaska, just on the bubble of civilization. There, even in the big cities, you'll get bear and moose and such. I was walking home from the bus stop. Our driveway was about a half-mile long through woods. I heard noises to my right and stopped, hoping it was anything but the one animal that scares me. And then it stepped out of the trees. I froze. My blood felt cold and stopped in my veins. It was a moose, female, fully grown, standing maybe 20 feet from me in the middle of the road. It stopped and turned to look at me. I was scared with no backup plan. What can a 12-year-old do up against a fully grown moose? Then it happened. I heard another noise. I thought I was truly dead. This time, it was behind me. I thought now my life was over. I'm between a mama and baby moose, and I am going to die. I remember feeling frozen, and not at all tranquil and at peace. I couldn't even scream. From the edge of my eyesight, I saw the second moose emerging from the thick strand of alder trees and disappear behind me. I could hear the steps on the soft dirt. My eyes locked onto the moose in front of me, trying to will it to stay calm. I stopped breathing. Then I felt it. A gentle whoosh of warm air down the back of my neck, followed by the unmistakable sound of a forced inhale. The moose behind me was sniffing my head. I could feel the breath, hear the nostrils flare. Some neighbor had dogs off in the woods away, and they must have gotten out of their yard and started barking inside the trees. That startled both moose, that turned and ran back the way they came, crashing into the small trees and leaving. To this day, the only animal I'm afraid of is moose. I've been fishing with brown bears, had black bears say hi as they walk by my camp. Mountain lions stalk us and then leave. It doesn't rattle me until I see a cow moose alone. And then I just hope to whatever is higher than me that I am not between her and her cub. This happened to my grandfather in the late 50s. He went camping with some of his buddies and his then girlfriend, my now grandmother. They were out in the middle of nowhere. Back then there were far more undeveloped areas, and it was pristine wilderness and very deep where they were going. They came across a clearing not too far in and decided to make their camp there. They got all their stuff and started building their camp. They were roasting food over the fire, drinking a few beers, and generally having a good time. It's quiet. Too quiet. All the noises in the forest had suddenly stopped. Everyone seems to have taken notice. They look around and can't see anything peculiar. It was still daylight. It was around 8 p.m. but there was nothing to give any indication that something was wrong. They look around for a little while, seeing if there's anything in the tree line. But after waiting around and seeing nothing, they continue chatting and try to forget about it. That night they fall asleep. The chirping and the animal sounds have come back to some degree, but not like it was before, and everyone is a little bit on edge. My grandfather and grandmother are sharing a tent, and of their friends, one of them goes to pee. They get out of the tent, walk away, and are not heard from in several hours. My grandfather wakes up in the middle of the night, also to pee, and as he's walking out, through the dim embers left in the fire, does he see a lump on the ground that wasn't there before. He darts over, and it's his friend. He's quietly sobbing to himself on the floor. My grandpa shakes him and asks him what's wrong. He's just mumbling incoherent babble, so he tries to take him into his tent and gets him to sleep. The next morning everyone wakes up and goes for breakfast. The friend is still in the tent, and when they wake him up and try to talk to him, he reveals something horrifying. He went out to pee in the night when he heard someone calling his name from down the forest. He went down to see who it was, thinking it was another one of the party who'd perhaps gone in a bit further to do their business and maybe were lost, seeing them in the dim embers of the light of the fire. But the further he went down, the more he realized that this person, or this voice, was getting further away. He started shouting to them, telling them that they were getting further away and to stay put. There was no reply. As he got further in, he heard someone almost behind him whisper, "Nearly there." He turned around, and there was nothing there. He ran as fast as he could, but tripped up on a vine and smashed his face to the ground. Although there was no cuts or bruisings, he crawled his way up the top and reached our campsite, and was huddled over just recovering in the dark for a few seconds, trying to lie low to not be seen by whatever it was. That's when my grandfather found him. He says that for the rest of the night, he stayed up until he passed out, listening, hearing the voice in the woods occasionally call out his name. "Roger, Roger, I'm waiting." He never went camping again. My grandfather swears this story's true, as the look on Roger's face was one of absolute terror, and there's no way that this honest, hard-working man would ever make something up like that. They didn't go camping again. A few years ago, I went camping with my dad, about a quarter-mile off the trail. As we were cooking food, a bear baby wanders into our small clearing. We were a bit freaked out, but it was probably more scared of us, so it wandered away. We left the campsite to hike a bit, and when it started to get dark, we traveled back to our campsite. We realized we hadn't marked it in any way, and spent a while looking for it. We heard some growling, really loud, and freaked. We started to walk on the trail back to the car, with my dad holding onto our only flashlight. We heard a growl closer this time, not super close, but close enough that we started to run. By then it was pitch black other than the flashlight. As I ran, I heard my dad drop the flashlight. He found it, but only one of the batteries was still in it. I was thinking this definitely felt like a basic horror plot. We ran pretty fast the few miles back to the car and drove home. We came back the next day and searched all day. Couldn't find it. We came back the next weekend. Still couldn't find it. And the next weekend, my dad went by himself and found it. He brought the stuff home. The tent had claw marks through it, and all the food that we hadn't yet hung in a tree was eaten. I have not been camping since. We were out in a state park, tent camping, not far from civilization. There were 3 of us. After drinking a bit too much and some other partying, we hiked a bit up the mountain behind our camp. Stupid. It was pitch black with a very steep incline. About 30 minutes into the hike, in the middle of nowhere, we see a structure. It's a door and not much else. The door is built into a brick building. It had 4 walls, but the structure was so small and built just for the door. The front was about 6 feet wide, and then from the front to the back, it was probably 2 feet. I know it doesn't sound that creepy, but when you find a closed door on a tiny brick building thrown into the party, it becomes really creepy. Turns out the door was unlocked, so we opened it and there's no floor inside, but a ladder going down. You bet your ass none of us had the balls to go down. We dropped some rocks, and it took quite a while to hit the bottom. No splash, just a solid smack of rock against concrete. There wasn't much else we could do. Shit was really strange. I have no recollection of where it was, and I don't ever want to go back. I live in Utah. I went hiking up the Bonneville Shoreline Trail that used to be the shore of Lake Bonneville ages ago. This day, I picked a different trail to follow, one I had never been on before. After hiking for a few miles up this trail, I came around a bend and I see true trees that had apparently been uprooted or fallen, and they were placed over the trail in a way that made it look like an archway. That by itself wasn't weird, but there were 2 big elk skulls placed on the end of each tree, placed just so that the empty eye sockets of the skull were looking directly at you as you passed under the trail. I thought that was kind of weird, but you know, whatever. Probably just some people thinking they're funny. I shrugged it off and kept going. But as soon as I passed through the threshold of the archway, a cold chill shot up my spine, and I felt my hackles rise instantly, and goosebumps all over my body. I kept going for a little while, because I didn't want to go back yet, but the whole time I was walking, I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being watched. It had me feeling really tense. I walked for a good 10 minutes before I decided to turn around. As I'm walking back, maybe 5 minutes later, it gets real quiet very suddenly. All of the birds stopped chirping. All of the little animals around stopped moving. It even seemed like the wind died down at that moment too. Total silence. My dad was a real big hunter when I was younger, so I'm very familiar with the idea that sudden quiet in the wilderness is generally bad news. By this point, I had a white-knuckle grip on the hilt of my big survival knife as I kept walking down the trail. I passed through the archway again and honestly broke into a full-on sprint. I didn't see anything, but there was something there. I was being stalked. I could feel the eyes still even as I ran down the trail. I haven't been back to that trail since that day. I don't know what it was that was stalking me, but there was something there, and I don't want to find out what it was. This happened while I was in Boy Scouts in Utah. The first thing happened when I was 8 to 10 years old. We were backpacking in one of the surrounding mountains of Salt Lake Valley. I can't remember which one. We'd finally reached our campsite after a few hours of hiking with heavy backpacks around dusk. Lit our camp stoves, ate dinner, and then set up tents for bed. Since it was a clear, cloudless summer night, my friend and I decided to leave the rain fly off and stargaze before sleeping. Our campsite was an open area, so we had a hell of a view of the Milky Way and thousands of stars. It was beautiful. The tent was kind of cramped. It was a 2-person tent, but really only one person could comfortably sleep in it. But we didn't care. It was one night. About an hour or two after, we started chatting and stargazing. We even saw the ISS pass slowly over us. One star was flashing different colors. We thought nothing of it at first, since planets tend to do that, but then it started zipping around randomly, from one end of the sky to the other, without pattern, all the while still flashing different colors. At first I thought I was seeing things, but my friend was seeing it too. It kind of freaked us out, but we just watched it. It kept zipping around the sky at insane speeds, occasionally stopping for a few seconds, then continued zipping around. At first, we thought maybe someone else was pulling a prank, but everyone else was asleep. We heard no laughter and no laser pointer could change color like that, so we kept watching it, never actually feeling afraid. And then, after what seemed like hours, it was just gone. We lay there for about an hour watching to see if it would return. It never did. The next morning we packed up, hiked back to our cars and left. Not sure if this next part is related, as we could have just been dehydrated. But it was pretty silent the whole ride home, and when we stopped for lunch on the way, someone said they didn't feel good, like throw up bad. At the time I thought nothing of it, other than, stay away from me, I don't want to be sick too. He was fine the following Monday at the meeting, so obviously nothing too bad. But now, all these years later, I have to wonder, whatever that star/planet or even UFO was, did it make him sick? Or was it just dehydration? This is another thing that happened to me. It was during my very last campout when I was about to turn 18. It was at City of Rocks on the Idaho side. On the way there, we stopped at the skeleton of a house to wait for the rest of the cars. It was bare framework, half collapsed, and absolutely littered with debris. Even a large dugout rectangular hole, probably for the basement. Being the stupid teenagers we were, we decided to explore a little. The leaders telling us to be careful, and to watch out for nails and potentially snakes. No one was hurt, even the couple of boys who decided to jump down into the basement area. Nothing of interest was found, so we got back into the cars and drove the rest of the way. Not sure if it's related, but something I've decided to add since it was at least interesting. The rest of the weekend went as usual. Even the one kid who always gets hurt manages to have to be taken to the hospital. We're forbidden to climb the rocks after that. So to protest, we broke the no electronics rule. The leaders didn't get upset at this and agreed that it was fair. Another friend and I, the one I'm very close with, had a Slenderman game on his tablet, which was still popular at the time. This is kind of important later. It was after midnight, we're all in our tents, and our electronics have exhausted their batteries. We lay down looking out the window at the very small mountain we all climbed all weekend. It's big enough to take a good 10 minutes to free climb, but small enough to see from the very top of our window about 20 yards away from base. So, more of a huge mountain-shaped rock. Anyway, it was about that time when we saw several shadowy figures that looked to be crouching low on the top of the mountain. Each time we tried to focus on one, it would vanish. This freaked us out a little. There were 3 of us in the tent, and we all saw them. We chalked it up to our mind playing tricks on us since we were exhausted, and we'd been taking turns trying to beat the Slender Man game. But we said it was best to ignore them and go to sleep. We were probably just out of our minds, trying to make us think there was something there. But who knows? I've seen some scary stuff in my life, and even my father has some scary stories from his childhood growing up in the southern Idaho desert. I guess I'll never know for sure. I grew up in Philadelphia, with a wooded creek behind our roadblock. My brother and I were always forbidden to play anywhere near there, and not even think about going there. So as any good little child does, one boring summer day, we smelled smoke and heard noises, and decided we were the best detectives to snoop it out. After minutes of walking further into the thicker brush, we finally saw the source of smoke, as we saw 2 men walking away from a burning car fire. It wasn't until a few years later after dinner, overhearing the adults talk about that poor unidentified little girl's remains found in a burnt skeleton of a car years ago in the woods, my brother and I, then 12 and 14, looked at each other wide-eyed, jaws dropped, as we put 2 and 2 together to realize what we had stumbled upon in the woods that day. And if we had been older or smarter, or unafraid of getting whooped by going down there in the first place, the murderers could have been caught, and even maybe that little girl could have been saved. But looking back at it, I realized more than likely she was already deceased before the fire, and that we're lucky to have made it out ourselves. It was a long weekend at the mountains. The weather was about 19 Celsius, and I was the only person that had camped before. I suggested everyone else not to pitch their tents on a very flat surface in case of rain. It hadn't rained in weeks, so it was pretty dry, so they paid no attention to my words. 2 or 3 a.m. came, and one of the biggest storms I had ever seen started pouring. The thunder and lightning was so constant, it faded out all the voices. Everyone got flooded and ended up moving into my 10-people tent, even though there were 16 of us in total. My girlfriend and I were the only dry ones. When the lightning stopped, we heard a huge crack, followed by a super loud scream. And then, complete silence. It was a female scream. Nobody wanted to exit the tent because it was pouring hard. The next day, only 2 out of the 5 tents were found. The water took the rest. Everybody's provisions were lost. The loud female scream was of a camping couple who were near our location, and a tree fell, crushing part of their tent. They were okay, but so traumatized they didn't speak a single word. We thought we were the only ones camping in the area, so the scream caught us totally by surprise. Super. When I was 8, I went camping with my mom, stepdad, and my little brother. We were all in the same tent. I remember getting up in the middle of the night to go to pee, and when I was walking back to the tent from the tree line, I heard, "Mike? Mike? Do you want to go for a walk in the woods?" It sounded exactly like my mum's voice, whispering, and I could see the silhouette of whoever it was whispering, and it looked like my mum. But I knew it wasn't her because I'd just left the tent, where she was sleeping. I remember my heart pounding like I knew it wasn't my mum, and it was something sinister. But I responded and said, "Yeah, 1 minute, let me just grab my coat," because I didn't want to upset her or it or whatever it was. "Hurry up then," the voice responded. I got into the tent and woke everyone up in a crazy panic. My mom and stepdad told me I must have been sleepwalking, but I swear I remember it so vividly. and I don't sleepwalk and never have. At the time, I knew in my head it was real. I'm terrified of the woods now. This is actually true, and I try and tell my mum every time now and then that I actually saw and heard what I said, but she perpetually dismisses it. If I'm honest, I don't really believe in the supernatural, but I don't know what that was. I went camping with a group of friends on some public land that I knew quite well. I spent a lot of time out there trail riding and camping most weekends for about 3 years. We set up camp at a spot we had used a few times and had partied with other people at this spot on a number of occasions. On this trip, there were 6 of us, and 4 of my friends decided to go to a party that we found out about while on the trails earlier that day. I was tired from digging my Jeep out of a sand washout that I had no business driving into, but it looked pretty cool for about 2 minutes until I got stuck. Anyway, my friend's girlfriend decided to stay at camp with me when everyone else left for the party. We watched the fire die down and listened to the animals. I got a kick out of her being afraid of the coyotes making noise on the other side of the swamp. I assured her it was fine and they wouldn't bother us. After a bit, we get into our sleeping bags. As I'm starting to doze off, she asks if I heard that. I ignore her and try to fall asleep. A minute or 2 later, she sits up and asks again. I respond, "Nope, go to sleep." Then, not even a minute later, I hear what sounds like an ice cream truck on the trail we're on. This trail is one way in and out, about 3 miles long, and ends in a clearing. And we were camped within a 1/4 of a mile of the entrance/exit. We also went to the end of the trail after we ate dinner, and there wasn't anyone on it then. No one drove past either. I did not hear any engine noise, only the creepy ass music. Not to mention the trail was a rutty mess, so even a vehicle with a reasonably quiet exhaust would be revving high enough to be heard through the woods. I didn't tell her this because I didn't want to scare her more, but it scared the crap out of me. So when she asked if I had heard it that time, we got into the Jeep and went to the party, and I slept on a raggedy couch next to the bonfire in a sand pit. I've been camping once, and never will again. So a few friends and I planned a trip to take our Enos to a camping ground and stay there the night. We got there, set up, made some s'mores and whatnot, and went to bed. Being the dumb high schoolers that we were, we did not check the weather, and it began to thunderstorm very badly about an hour into sleeping. We all rushed into my car, all 6 of us, and sat there for about an hour. After the storm passed, we got out and began trying to set up again. I hadn't taken more than 2 steps out the car when we heard a loud crash off in the distance. My first instinct was to get back to the car, but we came to the consensus that we should investigate. So we took some flashlights and walked down the road, about 500 yards, to find that a huge tree had crashed on a couple's Airstream. They were outside of it with their dogs, and the woman was shaking because she said the trunk landed about 2 feet from her head. We ended up calling the very reluctant park ranger, who came to take a look. He let us out of the campground, and we just drove back to one of our friends' houses for the night. It's really scary. I'm not sure what would have happened if we went down the road and had found the lady's head smashed in by that tree trunk. While my brother and I were camping at this primitive campsite in West Texas, it was about 12:30 at night, and we start hearing this very faint opera music in the forest around us. After heating up SpaghettiOs on our fire, which the park ranger specifically told us not to make, we'd noped the hell out of there and hiked the 6 miles back by moonlight to our truck and drove home. It was like it was following us, because we heard it all the way about a mile away from the parking lot. The reason it was creepy was because when we got to our campsite, after getting lost and escorted by the same park ranger from earlier in the story, he'd told us we were lucky to be the only people for miles around because of how peaceful it was. He said there was no one else there. This is the most insane thing to ever happen to me, and it is 100% true. Let me give you a slight backstory. We go to the desert in Glamis, California. It's a very busy desert. Hundreds of thousands could be there at any time, especially holiday weekends such as New Year. Glamis has meetup spots. One of those is called Oldsmobile Hill. It's a gigantic sand dune that hundreds of people meet up at and race up. Some people literally race some big trucks to try and see if they'll make it up the hill and get stuck. People on quads, buggies, dirt bikes, and everything in between go up this hill and mess around on it. Well, as you can imagine, it got a little crazy. Alcohol and horsepower don't mix, so there were a lot of accidents. And the BLM decided more cops and shutting down Oldsmobile around 9 PM before things got nuts for safety reasons. Side note, my dad once stumbled upon a wreck where the people were decapitated by another buggy. Like I said, it can be very dangerous. But the interesting part was that all the cops had SUVs at the time, so all you needed to do to outrun the cops was to go through the dunes. Their vehicles couldn't follow. So here we are. Oldsmobile shuts down at night. Cops in SUVs monitoring the area, more trying to keep it safe. Now to the actual story. I was 9 years old. It was New Year's weekend out in Glamis. There are large areas to camp, and everyone just kind of crams around each other in circles. So we're at camp. It's night. Night riding can be even more dangerous, and usually when you have young kids, you don't go out after dark. All the adults are drinking, and we had a large camp with maybe 25 people and 5 motorhomes. That weekend, someone brought a famous NASCAR/Baja racer. It was pretty cool. He brought his NASCAR lookout tower gigantic semi-truck 5th wheel trailer. Anyway, the adults were all drunk at this point. My stepmom and dad got into some huge blowout fight. Who knows what about? They always fought. But all of a sudden, my dad starts taking the tarp off our buggy like he's gonna leave. I know he's drunk, everyone knows he's drunk, and we try and tell him to stop, but he doesn't. Let me explain about the buggy we had. It has 1,110 horsepower. So this is not some play toy. My dad jumps into the buggy despite our attempts to stop him and takes off. It's night, so my stepmom and I are a bit worried. Everyone was in the middle of camp by a fire, and all witnessed him take off, all mad the way he did. Hours go by, hours. My stepbrother had gone to bed as well as all the other kids in camp had, except for me. I'm still sitting by the fire with most of the adults. I think they all wanted to know if he'd come back safely, and we're waiting. So like I said, it'd been a long time, maybe 3 hours, and it was quite late, maybe midnight. I'm freaking out, but quiet, as is my stepmom. Some of the people were whispering about it. When out of nowhere my dad comes flying into camp. I mean at least going 60, and slams on his brakes being all dramatic. He jumps out of the buggy and starts yelling at my stepmom to come help him put the tarp back over the buggy quickly. He's doing all of this in front of everyone, and they're all staring. We start asking him where he'd been, and he just shushes us and says basically nothing about anything. Now that the buggy is hidden under the tarp, he goes and puts on a hoodie, puts the hoodie up, and sits at the fire away from any openings in the circle of the camp. Weird, everyone was whispering. Even I can see something is very wrong. He's acting super shifty and freaked out, and wouldn't tell anyone what happened. Do you see where I'm going with this? He left drunk in a monster of a vehicle at night. Did he hit someone? Did he hit something and dip? What could he have done? Some of the people there were assholes, and I overheard them talking about that, and then I knew how truly serious the situation might be. So, now he's been back at camp for about 20 minutes. People are starting to go to bed, and all of a sudden, the piercing sounds come from everywhere and nowhere. Blue and red flashing lights come flying into every single angle of our camp, sirens blaring, as 10 cop cars literally pull right up to the campfire. Meanwhile, I had gone into our motorhome to get some sleep, but obviously ran outside in an instant when I saw all of this happening. The cops had megaphones and were calling my dad's name, saying he needed to stand up, put his hands on his head, and walk backwards slowly. All the spotlights beaming on him. I had tried to run to him, but some guy in our camp grabbed the back of my jacket just in time and pulled me back. I started screaming for my dad. My stepmom launches herself in front of my dad's outstretched arms, screaming and asking what he did. The cops were ignoring her and just commanding my dad to walk backwards slowly to their SUVs. As if all of this wasn't enough, a helicopter starts circling our camp with a spotlight directly on the cops and my dad, circling over and over. My dad gets to the cops and gets handcuffed. I'm screaming. My stepmom is screaming, about to get herself arrested because she's drunk and going nuts. My dad's about to get into the cop car when all of a sudden the cop says something over the radio, and the helicopter microphone comes on, and the pilot says, "Thanks for the ride, John," and takes off. The cops start cracking up. My dad's on the ground laughing, and everyone is freaking stunned silent. Like, what? We have absolutely no idea what's going on. The cops all shake hands with my dad. We're all just standing there so confused, and the cops leave. I shit you not. It was a prank. One of the most terrifying things to ever happen to me was a damn prank. We come to find out my dad had just drove around for a while to cool off, sobered up, and decided to go to Oldsmobile Hill after hours so that he could have it all to himself. He comes over the hill, and there are cops everywhere, and a little flight helicopter. They stop him, and he thought for sure he was in trouble, but they ask him for a ride. They were the cops and helicopter for Life Flight, and were just basically waiting around for some sort of emergency. My dad took all 10 cops and the pilot up Oldsmobile Hill over and over, racing up and launching over the top, scaring the hell out of all of them. When they are all done, one of the cops jokingly asks what they could do to repay him for the fun. And my crazy dad somehow got them to pull a full-scale invasion on our camp. I guess they had nothing better to do. So they did. It scared the absolute hell out of me and everyone there. It was the damn most terrifying thing that's ever happened to me. Then I was completely scarred by that event for a couple of years, waking up in the middle of the night and screaming for my dad in my dreams. Yeah. Thanks, Dad. I was winter camping in northern Wisconsin with a few buddies when at around 11 p.m, a guy appears in the firelight out of nowhere with no flashlight or headlamp. Now this place is not a campground, nor a national forest, or any land designated for camping, just wilderness. The nearest town is approximately 12 miles away, and the roads aren't plowed, so they're nearly impassable this time of year unless you have the right equipment. This guy sits down, has a couple of beers, is friendly, and leaves after about 45 minutes and disappears back into the forest. We have been camping and exploring this area for about a decade, and from the direction he came from, there is only forest that empties into vast swamps. I don't know how or where he was going or surviving that night, because it was midnight, and we never saw or heard a truck leave on the only road in and out of this area. There are no cabins back here, no camps, nothing. It was February in northern Wisconsin, and the low that night was around 5 degrees Fahrenheit. When I was younger, probably between 10 and 11, I went camping with my family. I'll just get right to it. It was about 1 or 2 in the morning, and I couldn't really sleep. The tent me and my brother were in was really hot and very uncomfortable. Anyway, while I was trying to go to bed, I heard a very faint whimper. I tried to ignore it, because I figured I was just tired. Our campsite was along a road with many other camps nearby. The whimpers started to get louder, and then turned into crying. I heard footsteps outside of our tent, and a girl crying her eyes out. Now let me tell you, it didn't go faint, it got louder and louder. It remained in the same spot the entire time. That's so important, because it indicates that she was looking at our tent site, crying. It then gets worse. Then it turned into a full-on scream for a few seconds, then cuts out. When she started screaming, my brother woke up. We both look at each other and just get all the pillows and stuff our heads under them. We couldn't sleep at all that night. I'm glad we left next morning. I live on a small 5-acre hobby farm, nestled amongst a bunch of other 5-ish-acre farms and homesteads. Not the suburbs, but not exactly deep woods either. Last year, some arsehole in a pickup truck pulled over on the road beside my house and started shooting into the forested area of my property. I was just sitting at the kitchen table when I heard a huge gunshot. I thought it might have been a backfire, but then it happened again. I ran outside and could just see the guy through our hedge. He had a very big rifle and was pointing at it, shooting at my goats. One of my goats is slim and brown and looks a bit like a deer. But dude, there are houses and people all over the place. Part of me wanted to march over and rip him a new one, but the other part of me told me I didn't want to become tragic headlines, so I just snuck closer to get a better look. But he got back into his truck and drove away. Turns out, one of my neighbors was outside at the time. He ducked behind a tree to avoid being shot. We called the cops, but we never managed to get his license plate number. I live in northeastern Oklahoma, and I consider myself a camping/fishing enthusiast. One spring night, me and 2 friends decided to go fishing. It's around midnight. We're going to a place that was once a maintained primitive camping area. This is not a remote location, but it's not very well known either. As we approach the turnoff for our spot, we see another vehicle slowly turning out of it, and proceeding in the way in which we came. We pass them, and a friend says how he figured no one else would be around. We get to our spot, get our gear out, and begin to prepare. But as we chat, drink a few beers, we all notice an unspoken uneasiness. Something is just not right. Usually I'm a trooper, fishing until the sun comes up, but I'm the first to crack. I explain to my friends how I feel, and that we should leave, and that I have a bad feeling. They agree. We load up, and while slowly driving through the old campground, we notice some brightly glowing embers in an area that no one has been. My friend who's driving stops without even thinking and goes for a look. He's startled, telling us to come see. What we saw were the remains of 3 crosses made of wood that would stand about 12 inches if upright. They had been burned along with the small campfire, and to make it even better, we were all lying on freshly turned soil which resembled a freshly dug grave. We freaked, got the hell out of there fast. Thank you, sweet baby Jesus, that we are home free, was all I thought. When we approached the exit of the old campground, we noticed a vehicle parked on the side of the road. We passed it, and realized it was the same car we passed on the way in. There was no one in the car. They had doubled back, and were likely watching us, waiting to do who knows what. This happened in the woods, and changed my view of the world as a teenager. Up the street from my childhood house was a couple trailers. I had a 4-wheeler and would ride up the trails all day. One day I'm riding and I get this random horrible feeling. So I stop and get off at the ATV and start walking up the trail. Well, some arsehat puts a piece of fishing line across the trail that would easily take my head off. I'm guessing that the feeling I had in the pit of my chest was that I was being watched, or that I subconsciously noticed the fishing line. I have no idea why I stopped that day, and it baffled me ever since, but it has honestly changed my life. My property is pretty old. We brought it from an old couple who gave up on it after a tornado destroyed the silos, barns, and a couple of sheds. We spent years fixing it back up, but only one of the barns got rebuilt. The other is still collapsed. The shed is worn down, and the door is blown out, which makes it always scary walking by a dark shed with an empty opening. This silo fell over, and is next to the shed, which is across from the 2 barns. All of this was on my walk to a deer stand in the furthest field in the back of my property. I was a freshman in college at the time, and hunted until it was dark. I left the stand and started quietly walking back. I always had an eerie feeling walking by the torn down barns, but at night, it's always way worse. I forgot to mention there's an old well with a concrete slab on the top of it, but the concrete siding had a hole. It always gave me the chills. As I'm walking by the wells and barns, everything is super quiet. I all of a sudden jolted my eyes to the fence along the field by the shed. I heard a chain whipping sound and faint giddy laughter. When I looked up, I saw 2 men in prison gang garments, white and black striped suits, quickly galloping away from me alongside the fence. Both were laughing and had chains on their hands and feet. I quickly fell to the ground and loaded my rifle in terror. I looked through my scope where I saw them running alongside at last. It was the biggest field on our property, so they had another 100 yards to go alongside the fence before they hit the woods, but they were gone. I laid there searching for 10 minutes before chalking it up to being sleep deprived from the morning hunt. I never had experienced something so real, or did I imagine it? I was out camping on a shoreline in Alaska for field work. It was getting dark, and I started falling asleep, with my bear spray next to me. In the middle of the night, I hear a deep, angry grunting sound. I immediately grabbed my bear spray and started yelling, "Hey, bear!" The noise doesn't stop for a solid 2 minutes, and I'm literally thinking it's the end. But then I hear a large splash. I never want to hear another sea lion growl in the middle of the night again. I live in a 16-foot camper. Before the rest of my family moved here, this was my research vehicle. I researched the history of human habitation in Colorado, so this camper has been everywhere. I've been to the harsh southeastern canyonlands, stepped out the door in the morning to find a herd of wild horses in the northwest, and endured severe storms on the short grass prairie. For a while, I took it to the US-Mexico border and lived on the grounds of a museum and battle site in the Chihuahua Desert. I'd been there for quite a bit, and at 2 a.m. I heard and felt an impact on my roof, just over my bed, and claws, big claws. I've seen Jeepers Creepers. I know how this works. Anyway, I just laid there, terrified, listening to something very big attempt to peel my camper like a tin can. About an hour later, it went away. In the morning I did snake patrol. Just before winter, a lot of rattlesnakes, lizards and such try to move into the museum, and when I looked at my camper, I saw blood on the roof and scratches. The small critters of the desert took care of a lot of whatever it was, so I didn't have much to wash off by the time I finished snake patrol. One thing I love and miss about the Chihuahua is its simplicity and efficiency. Everything has a role. Humans are just animals with fancy dens. Even if I am to be eaten by a chupacabra, it doesn't seem bizarre, because I'm living in a place where the bizarre is normal. So I went to bed that night, and the next, without much worrying about my imminent demise. A couple of nights later, it happened again. 2 a.m. Thunk, claws, scrabbling. Jesus. This thing spans the entire width of my camper. Claws scrabbling. Me, terrified. The thing goes away an hour later, and there's blood on my camper roof. The next night, thunk, claws, my camper roof being pummeled. Weird sounds. And then, thunk, on the other end of my roof, and the sound of claws coming closer to the roof over my bed. I ran out of the door, frantically unlocking my truck. From the safety of my truck, I looked back at my camper. The male owl looked on from my roof as a female owl devoured his furry, very dead offering. He lived in the water tower. She lived across the border near a feedlot. My camper roof was the only patch of white within plain view of her community. He'd been demonstrating his abilities to hunt and kill for a week, bringing half-dead prey to the roof, letting it escape over and over, and pinning it down over and over. Finally, on this night, he wooed her. It was so sweet, I never minded cleaning up the blood after that. It only lasted another week, and then I saw them together at the water tower. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's video. If you did, don't forget to drop a like and leave a comment with your thoughts, as it goes a long way. Something else you can do is subscribe if you're new here, and press the little bell icon for good measure. If there's a story that you would like to share, feel free to send it to my email or my Reddit. All the links can be found in the description. But anyway, for now guys, I'm gonna sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.